We are back with another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Who is this hidden gem of a prospect that's constantly getting more noise? Who were some risers and fallers in the Royals farm system? And lastly, should they take a chance on this pitcher because of his offseason workout? That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to yet another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And catch all these podcasting episodes on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is your first ever episode tuning in, of course, welcome in. And I'm sure you want to know a little bit more about me. I'm just a lifelong Royals fan, as I'm sure you are. My entire life is basically centered around sports because that's what my day job is as well. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a morning show on ESPN Kansas City. I've got a night show once a week on 810, so I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come here, when you click on this podcast, it is going to be all Royals talk for 30 straight minutes. And we want to continue to build this thing. You've heard me harp on it over and over and over again. But that is our goal. We want to shoot for about 100 new subscribers a month. And by the time we get to opening day 2024, we want to be at about 1K. And considering where we started last June, or this past June, not last June, but a couple months ago, we have come a far way. We have come a very long way from that point. So thank you to the listeners. Thank you to the followers for making that even possible. It's fun to do this podcast when you have the interaction, when you have the questions. It doesn't have to be shot over to me, to the public on Twitter. You can just direct message me. We had a couple guys today. Just shoot me over some questions. I will always get back to you there. Or if you want me to put it in the podcast, I'm always willing to put it in a segment because you, the listeners, you, the followers, make this thing happen. You make it so important. If it wasn't for you guys, it'd just be me talking to a mic about a team that I really like to watch. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And I know with football in full swing, college basketball coming up, NBA basketball coming up, and more importantly here with this show, the MLB playoffs in the National League and the American League Championship Series, a lot of you want to go and use FanDuel because it is America's #1 sports book. There's lots of fun bets to do. With baseball, it's endless what you can bet on. Hits, home runs, strikeouts, and you don't even have to wait till the end of the game. Now, you can make a bet on what's going to happen on a certain at bat. That's how advanced it can be. But we're going to talk about them coming up about 10 to 15 minutes or so. I think I'm going to jump back and forth a lot over the next couple months in talking about this team, the current team, and then from time to time, try to touch on the prospects of this system. And it's very bleak right now. I think that's the best way to put it. It's bleak. And Kansas City knows that. The rest of baseball knows that. You talk about the MLB pipeline system, Baseball America. Everybody knows the Royals do not have a lot of talent in their farm system. A lot of these guys they have now are going to be prospects maybe in a year or two. When I mean prospects, I mean top 100s. I don't just mean prospects in your system. But I'd also say a handful of these guys are going to be projects. You're not putting somebody in the system where they're an immediate top 100 guy. Now, when they draft in the upcoming draft and they'll get a number 1, number 2, number 3 pick, at least that's what the odds would tell you, that player will be a top 100 prospect. That player will catapult himself to the number 1 spot in this top 30 ranks. But I would say the majority of the guys, top 30, and the majority of just guys in AA and high A and low A right now, they're more of projects. Whereas it comes down to development more than anything. We always say with the minor league system, development is key, of course. You could have a blue chip guy and that blue chip never amounts to much because he wasn't developed properly. And the Royals have had their fair share of failures when it comes to developing players. But I think the hardest position and the hardest age group to develop is catchers, one, which is why we discussed it for a full week when the Royals took Blake Mitchell, a high school hitting catcher, and the last one that had truly succeeded was Joe Mauer. I mean, it'd been a long time since a high school catcher had been taken top 10 in the draft, and they had thrived. I mean, not many success stories there. But a really difficult age group to gauge in a position is catcher, and also, I would say, international players that are anywhere from 16 to 18 years old. And if you're unfamiliar what happens after the Royals or anybody signs an international prospect, if they're 16 to 17 years old, I mean, of course, if you sign a 15-year-old, they're not going to immediately go and play in the Dominican Summer League, but that's usually where they go. You send them to go play in the Dominican Summer League. It's a very offensive-heavy league, so you don't always want to buy everything from that. One of the greatest stories from 2023 was Emmanuel Reyes, who made his way all the way to Low A Columbia, and he won't turn 20 until this coming May. But he had been lights out in 2 years in the Dominican Summer League. They finally moved him to the States to pitch for Low A Columbia, and I thought he carried on that trend pretty well. I mean, you're going to have a guy likely in the top 30 at some point next year once a couple of guys graduate, and you're going to have a 20-year-old prospect in Low A, and maybe by the end of the year he gets to High A. Or if he really excels, maybe by September he's in Double A or something like that. But that's putting the cart before the horse here. But there is one guy that has sparked my interest. I think that is starting to get more prospect recognition is Ramon Ramirez. And here's what's important. Ramon Ramirez was not a 2017 signee, 2018 signee. He was signed last January. And this is kind of in this wave, in this new era of the Royals trying to look at different guys, because international scouting has been an abject failure for the last 5 to 6 years. I mean, the Royals have just not produced a lot of significant talent. And you look around baseball at guys that really became superstars. I mean, Ronald Acuna Jr. to Royals fans is like the poster child of that. He was related to Alcides Escobar. Alcides Escobar said to sign him. They had stuff ready to go. They had the money on the table. Last minute, Braves go in and offer just a little bit more, and he goes to the Braves. Now, does Ronald Acuna Jr. become who he is with the Royal system? We'll never know, but I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say no, because the way the Braves developed guys and the lineup they had around him is a lot different than when Ronald Acuna Jr. would have been with the Royals. So we'll just never know. And maybe that's a good thing that we'll never know if the Royals would fail the development of a superstar in baseball like Ronald Acuna Jr. But I know, of course, I would take Ronald Acuna Jr. with this lineup right now. But that to me is kind of the poster child. With Cincinnati, Elly De La Cruz, they signed him to barely anything. Develop him properly. I know he didn't have a very good end of the season, and really it was more of a really good 2-month stretch than over the course of his rookie season. But that's the type of talent I would like to see the Royals go and find. Hidden gems. That's what I would say the international prospects are. They're hidden gems. It takes a lot to develop and gauge what that player is, which is why Ramon Ramirez is such an interesting candidate. He's a catcher, and he's a big-time hitting catcher. And I know I said the Dominican Summer League is a bit of an offensive league, but his numbers are ones you can't really deny. And he just turned 18 in June, so he won't be 19 until the middle of next year. But as I said, the Royals just signed him in January, and there's a good chance we'll see him in Colombia at some point next year, maybe before he turns 19. But in 41 games in the Dominican Summer League, he had 150 plate appearances. He slashed 344, 440, 615 with a 1.055 OPS, 8 home runs, 27 RBIs, and 6 stolen bases. So kind of an all-around talent offensively. He's got the power, got the speed, hits for average, gets on base, and he got some work, if I'm not mistaken, in the Arizona Fall League. There were some videos that surfaced, really smooth swing, and that to me excites me because the Royals have not had this type of performance, at least from a catching prospect, in quite some time. I mean, we're talking about Blake Mitchell. We're talking about a handful of guys in this system that just can't showcase early on in their professional careers that they can be a long-term fit. Right, with Carter Jensen, now I still think there's something there with Carter Jensen, but he doesn't hit for much average. He gets on base a lot, got the power, and he made some adjustments last year. But even though it's the Dominican Summer League, to see a guy you signed at the beginning of this year tear it up in the first level that he's at, it gives you hope that, okay, let's get him to low A. He doesn't need to stay in the Dominican Summer League till he's 20 or 21. Some guys do. Some guys can't make that jump, and now it's going to be, what is he like once he gets over to the States? But it's something to watch here. When you have a prospect system, when you've got a farm system that doesn't have a lot of talent to begin with, you look for hidden gems like this. Emmanuel Reyes on the pitching side, he's a hidden gem. And I think Ramon Ramirez is a hitting gem that you have on the catching side of things. That's important to know. And it will be fun to gauge where he is at the beginning of the year, if they start him in low A or if they give him another stint in the Dominican Summer League. But I think there's a chance to be a big-time prospect here in a couple of years in Ramon Ramirez. All right, the next thing we're going to dive into is more on this farm system, the risers and the fallers. Who do I believe is going to have a chance to make their debut in Kansas City this upcoming year, and who is starting to lose that hope that they're going to be a player in Kansas City? I'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in FanDuel. There is so much to bet on right now, from college football to the NFL. You've got college basketball right around the corner, NBA the same. But here with the Locked On MLB network, of course, postseason baseball is in full swing. I had the chance to watch the Phillies and the D-backs last night, the night before. I'm watching Texas and Houston. And if you're not amped up to place some bets on these games, or just an at-bat, or just an over-under, stuff like that, you're doing it wrong. Because FanDuel is where you need to be at when you're watching these games. It is America's #1 sportsbook. And as I said, October baseball is back, and you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when all you have to do is place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait until the whole game to get that W, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. You know, this is going to be a prospect-centric type of show, and hopefully it gives you some optimism. But I'm also going to have to sprinkle in some negativity here because, as I stated before the break, we're going to talk about the risers in this system and the fallers in this system. And a lot of the risers I do have on my list in front of me are guys that just jumped in to the Royals farm system. I'm meaning 2023 prospects, because I really do believe the bats they went after are going to be guys that really, really, flourish early on. We're talking low A, high A, and get to double A rather quickly. And some of these arms that they took even in 2022 have already made their way to double A. And that's something that is something to watch, because when you have a young arm in double A, that's when they're going to be tested the most. I don't feel like they need long stints in triple A if they can really dominate in double A. And we saw that with Chandler Champlain. We saw that with Mason Barnett. Those are all good signs to have. But the hitting ranks have kind of plummeted a little bit. Not all the guys that we expected to continue that trend to have a really good 2023 didn't happen for everybody. And yes, that's problematic, because you, of course, want your farm system to flourish. You want your farm system to be better and better and better every single year. And I thought there was a little bit of a dip this past year. And the big problem with it, at least from the name alone, the headliner of your top 10 prospects was Gavin Cross, your first-round pick from the year before. He struggled this year. And when that happens, it kind of takes any shine you have on the hitting development in high A, double A, and triple A. But I did think that the pitchers had a little bit more success. So let's start with one riser here. One riser absolutely has to be Mason Barnett. Because Mason Barnett in that draft class, he wasn't somebody that had electrifying numbers at Auburn. I mean, we talked about him not too long ago. He just wasn't a guy that popped. It was, wow, I can't believe Mason Barnett fell to the Royals. The Royals saw something with him, developed him, I thought, very well, and they got him to Double-A, and I didn't really see the struggle in Double-A. Now, be sure to go follow Preston Farr on Twitter. He does a fantastic job covering everything in the minor leagues for the Royals, and he's been up to date with Mason Barnett. So follow him on Twitter at Royals Minors. But Mason Barnett is a guy that I believe has an outside chance later on in the season to make that debut. I mean, if you start him in Double-A Northwest Arkansas, which is where I expect him to be, I could see him in Omaha by maybe late July or August. And then it matters how long do you want to see him in Omaha. Do you just want to have him continue to finish out the season? Or if the rotation is thin enough at that point, he could get that chance. He's a college arm. You want him to progress rather quickly. So he, to me, was one of the top risers in this system. One of the big fallers for me, I'm going to go with another pitching prospect here. And, I mean, do I really need to say much more? And I think everybody can expect at this point who I'm going to say. It's Asa Lacy. And it still is going to be Asa Lacy number 1 in 2024 until we figure out where he is. Nobody knows where Asa Lacy is right now, except for maybe people close to Asa Lacy. I mean, to me, that's the scary thing about this all. I mean, is it injury related? Is it a mental aspect? I mean, you got to get right. That's the number one important thing. Baseball at that point doesn't matter if you're not mentally okay. But it's frightening that nobody knows. Nobody knows where he's working out. There's no videos of off-season workouts. There was no story done on him. I mean, I think there was an update done by Annie Rogers, who does a great job on MLB.com. And I think Preston Farr, of course, had another update. But other than knowing that he had a couple of simulated games, I thought, or just warming up a little bit, hadn't heard much on him. So he has to be the number 1 faller because he's not even in the top 30 anymore. And that's a guy you took in the first round 3 years ago. He should be pounding on the door of Kansas City. He should be in AAA Omaha, but he's going to have to start in Quad Cities if he even gets to spring training. So hopefully at some point in this offseason, we get some form of an update. And that, to me, is all I'm looking for at this point. Back to a rising prospect here. I'm going to go with another arm, and it's David Sandlin. David Sandlin, to me, was a really sneaky pick the Royals had in 2022. A little bit later on, was really good in the College World Series for Oklahoma, and I like the arsenal that he has. I think a lot of his pitches, a lot of the horizontal type movement is going to play at the big league level. I thought that he was fantastic in Columbia. The fact he got to Quad Cities, that's always a bonus, and I'd like to see him at some point near the end of next year in Double-A and close to Triple-A. That's kind of my goal for David Sandlin, because I still think being a later round pick, you're not going to expect them to just blow through every system, blow through every single level. It's going to take some time. But I do think the development has been pretty good for him. And it reminds me a lot of my next riser I'm going to have in the system, being a later round pick, but somebody you really noticed and was a notable player in college baseball the year before. Back to the fallers here. I am going to take somebody that maybe I had more hopes for at the end of the day. I thought when they drafted this kid that it was going to be maybe not the quickest of jumps. He wasn't going to fly through the system, but it's just a guy that maybe I thought had a better chance of getting to Kansas City by 2025. I'm going to go with Carter Jensen here. When you draft Blake Mitchell and you want to add depth to this prospect rank, you want to add depth to that position, it just kind of made me think about somebody like Carter Jensen. I think he's a great on-base guy. I think he hits for a lot of power. But at some point, I don't want to look at a first, second, or third-round pick and have to make an excuse as to why they can't progress to the next level. I would have liked to see him in Double-A at some point. We didn't see him in Double-A last year. And the fact now that you have Blake Mitchell, you kind of turn your attention to Blake Mitchell. It's okay, now what's in the future for Carter Jensen? Is there a true big leaguer there? Maybe he gets to the big leagues, and that would, be, of course, be a big-time accomplishment. But the big thing is, can he be a consistent contributor at the big league level? And is he going to be a catcher at the big league level? So he, to me, is my second faller. And real quickly, one last riser, one last faller. It's going to be, Javier Vaz for me. Javier Vaz for me was notable at Vanderbilt. He was a spark plug for them, a great leadoff hitter. And, man, he might be my favorite prospect in the system right now. I mean, to be drafted after the first 10 rounds, after the first 12 rounds, and be hitting the way that he's been hitting at every single level, it's been consistent. He hasn't really had a drop-off, and I thought he was really good in Double-A to close out the year. So you start Javier Vaz in Double-A. Depending on the outfield depth in Kansas City, it would not shock me at all if he gets up to Kansas City at some point late next season. They don't need to protect him on the 40-man roster yet. He won't be Rule 5 eligible, but it would not shock me if they just put him on the 40-man roster at some point next year because of how much I think they value him. That has been a great job for player development by the Kansas City Royals. And lastly, another prospect that just kind of has fallen off the ranks for me. It's not somebody that maybe I should have bought too much into. It's not somebody that I feel like I should be gushing over. But it's just somebody that I feel like at the end of the day, when you trade for somebody like him, when he's in a prospect bundle, then I expect to see a quick jump. And it's going to have to be TJ Sycamore to me. They acquired him in the Andrew Benintendi deal. I thought he was going to be the guy that made the quickest jump to Kansas City. But, Beck Way, he struggled, but then kind of found himself. Chandler Champlain has been fantastic since coming over in that trade. And now I'm kind of wondering, what's the future for TJ Sycamore? I expected a lot more from him. And at the end of the day, you just didn't hear that much about him in 2023. So he's going to be my third faller on the list. All right, we're going to hustle here real quickly. When we come back here, we're going to talk about Zach Plesac, a guy that Cleveland gave up on. But is there any hope in the Royals giving him a flyer, giving him a chance going into spring training? I'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And before we go any further, let's give a shout out to the other title sponsor today in Bird Dogs. And as you can see, I'm wearing my Bird Dogs hat. I love everything that Bird Dogs has to offer. They're so comfortable. It's getting a little bit chilly here in Kansas City, so you want to make sure you've got comfortable sweatpants. Well, Bird Dogs is where I get my sweatpants from. My shorts, Bird Dogs as well. And I love wearing this hat all the time. It's comfortable. It's a adjustable fit. I mean, all the apparel they have is just fantastic. It's comfortable. And that's what matters to me. I hope it matters to you when you're buying your clothes. Of course, you want to have fashion, but Bird Dogs has fashion. So why not get the knock out two birds with one stone? No pun intended for Bird Dogs, but have the comfort, have the style. Bird Dogs is what you're going to want to go for. And it's easy to go and find them. It's easy to purchase things, and they give you a lot of fun apparel. And here at the Locked On Podcast Network, we give you some fun apparel with some codes. So here's what you need to do. After this podcast, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or enter promo code LockedOnMLB at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB for a free water bottle at checkout. You don't want to take your Bird Dogs off. They promise you. There's going to come this time in the offseason where the Royals are going to start handing out flyers. And if you don't know what flyers means, you're just giving guys minor league deals, invites to spring training. See if they can cut it. It could be a guy that was hurt all of last year. It could be a guy that's far past his prime. You just want to see what he has. Maybe you've been keeping up to date with an off-season workout, a strength regimen. Maybe a coach says, hey, I've worked with this guy before. I think there's something there. Every team goes through that point in their season, or at least off-season, I should say, where you find a guy and you go, let's give him a chance. Let's give him a flyer. Let's just place a claim on him. Let's make a trade for him. We'll see what he looks like in spring training. And one guy that was brought to my attention that makes a good amount of sense for the Royals in the state of their pitching rotation is Zach Plesac. Now, Zach Plesac has not been very good the last 2 years, and he had a career worst year with Cleveland, was let go. Nobody picked him up. So maybe that should already be the red flag that pops up. You have a guy that wasn't terrible in his career, but really struggled in this last year, 2023, wasn't very good in 2022, was cut bait with, nobody picked him up. I mean, why would nobody even, place a waiver claim on him? I feel like that would be the easiest thing to do, but maybe that just wasn't in the cards for a lot of teams. They just didn't want to take a chance on somebody like Zach Plesac. But something that caught my eye, and we did a podcast episode on Tread yesterday and their work with the Royals, and I think they've done a fantastic job. Well, it was brought to my attention through Twitter that, someone we were looking into was, Zach Plesac appears like he's at Tread. Tread came out and told us he's not working there. He's working at another facility. So that kind of squashes that. But what we do know is Zach Plesac is working on a splitter. And that same type of splitter that Kevin Gausman uses for the Toronto Blue Jays that basically revamped his career. I mean, you go to Kevin Gausman a few years back, nobody's thinking about Kevin Gausman being a Cy Young candidate, a 200 innings guy, a 200 strikeouts guy. We thought the Baltimore days of Kevin Gausman were long past us. There just wasn't much left in the tank. Then he kind of refined his windup, refined his arsenal, and he became a big-time ace for the San Francisco Giants and then got a mega contract with the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm not saying Zach Plesac can do that. I'm not saying that Zach Plesac is going to be a guy that you look into and go, he's going to be Kevin Gausman because he's developing a splitter. Anybody can develop a splitter, but it is interesting because you have a guy that I never thought was that bad of a pitcher. I thought that when he was in Cleveland's rotation, he was just a bulldog. He was somebody that, lost a lot of velocity, but when he was at his peak, when he was in his prime, that was a tough guy to face. I feel like the Royals always struggled against Zach Plesac. And now you have this connection with Brian Sweeney, which is important. I think Brian Sweeney having that connection with Zach Plesac, maybe he likes him, maybe he doesn't. I don't know personally. But these are the type of arms in the offseason that I think really just scream Royals. If you're trying to add a lot of depth, if you want to see a lot of guys in spring training, there's no harm in bringing in Zach Plesac. It makes a lot of sense. See if that splitter can turn into something. Give him a shot at spring training. If he fails, if it's nothing, okay. You didn't cost yourself anything financially. You gave him a minor league deal. He's not making much and an invite to spring training. It's something to look into. I really think there's a chance for the Royals to be that team that can maybe down the road resemble the Rays a little bit. And no, maybe the Rays aren't the best team to pick out here because they don't make it far to the postseason in a regular year, not the COVID year. But I will say this, that last year I saw from time to time a little bit of influence. Finding Cole Ragans. It doesn't pop it originally. And you go, I don't know why the Royals are acquiring Cole Ragans. Saw what he became. James MacArthur. You trade an 18, 19-year-old prospect for a 26-year-old AAA arm. Why? Well, because what we saw in September is what the Royals saw. And that's why I think whenever they go after somebody, I can have a little bit more faith. Did anybody think that Aroldis Chapman would be where he's at now when the Royals signed him? I don't think anybody thought he'd make it past spring training. And maybe if he did, he's not making it to May. He was going to get lit up. He has no command. The velocity's not there. Royals fixed something there. And that's why I'm saying there's some sort of feel that they can in the future, not now, but in the future, be that team like Tampa where they pick up somebody, they immediately get better. They just fix everything about themselves. And that's important to watch here, at least to me. If you go out and bring Zach Plesac in, I'm not throwing my arms up and going, oh my gosh, you're signing a guy with a 7+ ERA last year. Makes no sense. He's terrible. He's not good. On a minor league deal, it doesn't matter. Bring in 5, 6, 7 guys on minor league deals and see what they can become. Somebody's bound to hit, which is why I think it's worth taking a chance on somebody like Zach Plesac. If that splitter turns into something, you notice it, and you want to take a chance on it, maybe it can really pay off in a big-time way. Because then he makes the roster. It's still a minor league deal, a 1-year deal. No harm, no foul. He fails in the regular season. The spring training was kind of a mirage, false hope. Fine, cut bait. But I do think there is something to look into there. I thought for the first 3 years of his big league career, he was a very serviceable starter, and it's something to look into. Cleveland always had a great rotation, and he was just the odd man out. He struggled too much early on in the season. They had better guys to replace him. The Royals don't really have a set rotation. See if maybe he is somebody you can bring into spring training, bring into surprise, and work his way back. He's not old, and he's only 28 years old, might be 29 this upcoming year, but I would say it's worth it. Minor league deals are absolutely worth it. And for a guy that I thought was a serviceable start at one point, no harm, no foul. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.